and today I'm going to talk about how I designed top 20 drinks for model. Like any other data visualizations based on open data, the first thing is idea. The idea behind this Power BI model was long time ago. I saw a dashboard based on cocktails with pretty pictures. That's when I thought like maybe I wanted to do something in Power BI where I could showcase some pretty pictures. That's the basic idea behind this Power BI model. Once we're happy with the idea, the next thing is finding data. Finding data is one of the difficult job when it comes to the open data. First of all, if you're happy to pay, that's a different story, but I was looking for free open data. So I was pretty overwhelmed because there was not much data available. So after wasting quite a bit of time, I decided, okay, instead of for trying to create one big dashboard, maybe I should focus on just creating something for 10 cocktails. So that's when I started looking up for top 10 or top 20. I managed to find a list of top 20 drinks, and then I found a free API where I could pass the cocktail name, and in return I get a JSON file back with all the information, especially like pretty pictures, ingredients, and the instructions. So that's how I kind of managed to find the data. The third thing when it comes to the dashboard design is layout. For layout for this particular model, I was focusing on making it simple, trying to provide hints, especially because I have very little data, because I don't have a lot of data. I wanted to have it as a one pager with a minimal design. So for that reason, what I did is I chose a left pane where I could have my total number of all list of drinks, and then I chose a top pane where a user can go and do the selection, and in the middle I've got a box where it shows all the information related based on the selection. And I also tried providing some hints, I have tooltips where user can go hover over on the top visual, so it gives them a quick hint about what kind of drink that is, how it's going to look like. And also I've used a dynamic label on on a visual, just so that in case if the user if there are more than one selection, because user needs to be select only one drink at a time, then only the report works. So for that reason, I've provided this dynamic label, so user gets a hint saying they know they have to choose one selection at a time. And the last thing is color palette. For any report, for any data visualization or any dashboard, choosing the right colors, appealing colors is important. Initially, I wanted to create a dark themed dashboard, but then my pictures were not showing really well on the dark theme. So foreground is very important when you're designing. Well, so does the background. Foreground and background, both are very important when you're designing a report. So I went for somewhere in between. Instead of going for completely light or neither dark, went for somewhere in between. So my left pane has a dark background, and the rest of the report is pretty much light background. And in the top bar where I have the selection bar, I'm using a tree map visual. In the tree map visual, whatever the values the tree map visual is showing is depending based on the slicer. So when the user changes the slicer, the colors in my top bar is going to change. So I wanted to control that, because I want my user to be able to see all the foreground data, because my top selection bar has labels. So for that reason, I've used I want hue, and I created a palette based on based on how many records I have, and that's what I've used. So that was my base approach behind creating this data model. Now let's look at how I designed it. Let's start by looking at the Power Query. So these are a list of my drink types. This is just a static data. And to this, I'm adding a custom column. So I'm in the custom column, I'm basically calling this CocktailDB API. So this is a JSON file. I'm going to get a JSON file returned. So I'm calling for each row, I'm calling this API. So that enables me to get a JSON record for every single item I have in this table. You can do this various ways, but this way I don't have to create multiple different function in Power Query. It's probably easier way for me to get it. And afterwards, I'm just doing the various transformations in this data. There are a few other things I have here is like I have various queries. I'm not doing much in each query. I have like cocktail data, which is basically providing me all the cocktail information. I have ingredients, which is again it's referenced from the base query, but it is providing me all the ingredients information, especially the image files that I was talking about. Then the other query I have here is color codes. So the color codes here is what I have here. For each drink, I specified a color. I'm going to talk a bit more about how I managed to get these colors in a bit. So this is basically what's happening in the Power Query. Now let's jump into the designer view. So in the designer view, let's have a quick look at the data model. The data model is pretty simple. There is just two tables. One is one which has ingredients and the other one which has all the cocktail information. Now, if we go to the designer view, so this is for how it looks like. So when the user first selects all the drinks or all the drink categories from this left pane, and then wherever there is more than one type of sub drinks, for example, if I go to mojito, I'll get this another visual on the top, which looks like a slicer, but it's not a slicer. This is a tree map. I would talk more about like why I was using the tree map in a sec, but like the user can go and click on that top visual, and in here this gives me the more information about about the about the drink I've chosen based on my selection. If the user doesn't choose a single selection, I'm getting a hint saying please choose a selection. And when the user hover over on this visual, there is a little tooltip showing like how the drink may look like if that is something that I'm interested in. So I could go to a different one and I could choose like what kind of drink that is. And this also helps us to look at so for example here you cannot read the entire label. So having the tooltip it kind of enables me to understand, oh, what was that drink? And if I am happy, then I could obviously click on that, and that gives me the drink I'm looking for. Let's see how I managed to get into this design. So let's start with the left pane, which is the slicer pane. So the slicer pane is by default when you place a slicer in Power BI. This is pretty much how it looks like, and then you can change the slicer orientation to like horizontal orientation by going into properties, but this is by default how it looks like. But if you want our slicer to be a bit more nicely spaced out like how I've done in this visual, what you can do is you could go to your visual, the slicer visual, go to properties and go to items, add a frame. So now I added a frame, then go to general, change the outline color of the frame. So by default, this is how it looks like. Change the outline color of the frame to your background color of your visual or the background color of your page. Then increase the size of your outline weight. So in this case, I'm changing it to 8. So there you go. Now I have nicely sparsed visual, nicely spaced. And if I want, I could do the similar thing to to this one as well. So maybe if I just enable the frame on outline, in this case probably I could just do um, like a left plus right, so this way, like, I get it nicely spaced out. This is not a great example in this case, but maybe if I do a bit more modifications to the colors and the what kind of background I'm using, this probably gonna look better. But here you could see like it makes a huge difference with the by using the default one or by adding the space. When you're working with limited number of items on your slicer, or if you want your slicer to be nicely spaced out, using a frame and changing the color of the frame either by same color as background color of your visual, or if you're not using the background color of the visual, then maybe same color as your code page, then it would make your slicer visual to look nicely spaced and a bit more sleek. Next, I wanted to talk about using the tree map as a slicer. So by default, most of the Power BI visuals supports cross-filtering. So I wanted to use that functionality to actually cross-filter my data. But instead of using it as a traditional like a tree map, I actually wanted to show it as a slicer. So there are a few benefits of doing it that way. So one is I wanted to use the tooltips functionality. So I cannot use the tooltips functionality on the default slicer. So I wanted to use the tree map as a slicer so that I could use the tree map, the tooltip functionality. And the second thing is I wanted to be able to have this dynamic background to my items. Various reasons. One, to add some color and to the report. It's not only just to add the color, but it's more like it makes it look nicer. And the third reason for using the tree map as a slicer in this case is, okay, let's have a look at it. So for example, tree map definitely gives me the functionality I'm after. So if I go here and I could go and slice the data, so that gives me only the selected value. When I don't do it, it shows, when I don't do a cross selection, then it shows all the data I wanted. But if I actually use the normal slicer, for example, in this case, I have a normal slicer. My drinks, I've chosen it as a normal slicer. For example, if I choose Negroni here and if I go to Martini, and by default, because I've chose Negroni in the previous selection, when I moved my when I changed my slicer selection on the left pane, automatically the drink got selected because I previously selected that, and that's appearing in this slicer. So, but in reality, the Negroni doesn't belong to this drink group. So I don't want that to be appear there. But if I use the tree map as my slicer, because this visual is cross filtering this visual. So if I choose something smaller selection, so for example, if I go mojito, in the default slicer, I have Negroni, but in my tree map, that doesn't show. So that gives the user a nice way of navigating. For example, when I go back here, when the user goes and if they choose something, it always, like, it won't appear in the previous one. However, I'll have a different problem here, because for example, if I go to Martini and I chose Martini, then if I go to Ito, and I cannot do any other selection here, because if I hover over it, you can see my visual already included Martini as a drink. That is the reason I am using this hint to show, is like when there is, for example, if I go to Mojito and choose Mojito, I get Mojito as selected. And then if I go to Martini, I automatically, it's saying, because I already got mojito got selected. Even if I don't go to mojito, maybe let's go to something which has only one drink. Even though there is only one drink available, because I've already chosen a drink previously, it is telling me to select a drink on the top, so that way it always gets only single value selected. So now if I look at it, there is no slicer selected from this visual. So it's this way, all these visuals are not filtering. All these visuals are just filtering through this one. So now when I move between any other single drink, sub drink type, I could automatically see. But again, when I go back to something which has more than one drink, then it tells me the same thing again, like, choose a selection. So that was the reason why I'm using the tree map as a slicer. And let's look at how I'm doing this dynamic hint or dynamic label to show only when there is a values. So to create the dynamic label, what I'm doing is I've created a measure. So um, what I'm doing is in the background, I've used an expression. So based on a value, show the background color. So when I go to my expression, what I'm doing is it's a pretty simple expression. Whenever there is more than one, whenever there is one value, show the transparent. Otherwise, show my background color. So that's pretty much what's going on here. It's a very simple measure. So if there is a single selection, that's when it shows the background. It shows the transparent color. So whenever I choose a single one, because my count is one, that's why the background color is changed to transparent. That's why I could see everything, and I don't really be able to see any tooltips or any other hover overing functionality on this visual. But that was not the use case for this use for this report. So I am just using a shape on the top, and for that shape I am using the wallpaper background functionality. And the same goes to the font for this title as well. So when it comes to the label, I'm just using a text label, and the text label is based on the measure. If it is one, then don't show any text, otherwise show the text. So based on the selection, it shows the text. So that's how I'm doing the dynamic label. Now, next I wanted to talk about overlaying. So as you saw here, I've got various underneath visuals. So this is how it looks like. Because I have all the data, like quite too much data. I want my user to be able to see these visuals only when there are single selections. So for that reason, what I've done is when the user does the single selection, it shows the right data. Otherwise, it shows everything which is available under this category. And probably I could modify my data model to show it, like, there is always one to many relationship and things like that. But in this use case, what I did is, instead of using that, I am overlaying the shapes and hinting the user to do only single selection. So for that, what I did is I used a card and shape. So for the card, I've used a text based on a measure. This card shows the text data only when there is more than one value. So let's quick look at that. So whenever there is more than one value, it shows text, otherwise it shows the blank. And then I placed that card on a shape. So this shape is just a normal shape, but for the shape, I went to the expressions, and for the background, I am using the dynamic color formatting. So based on a field, I'm changing the color of the background of that shape. So I'm using this measure. It's a very simple measure, similar logic like the text. So whenever if there is a single selection, then then the background color of the shape is transparent. Otherwise, the background color of the shape is same as my background color of the report page. So that way, whenever there are more than one drink, or if the user has not selected one drink, then by default, this is the message the user would see. But when the user selects a drink, then it automatically, based on the expressions and also based on the measures, we don't see that messages, and it actually gives you a bit of navigation, like, okay, this gives me all the underneath details. So we are just overlaying a shape and a card visual to control that logic. And final touches to this report page are colors. So as I mentioned before, I wanted to go for somewhere in between, like not too much dark but not too much light. And I wanted my foreground labels to be white pretty much everywhere except this hint. So for that reason, here I've used a dark background. Here, what I did is I wanted to be able to choose, always make sure my foreground, the white color I've chosen, to be visible. So let's have a quick look, like what happens if you don't have the restated colors. So this tree map is not using any predefined colors. This is by default using the color theme from Power BI. So what happens is, this is good colors I could read, but maybe if I go somewhere else and choose different ones, like for example over here, if you see on the yellow background white font, you can't really read it, and there are various cases where that may be the case. So for that reason, what I'm doing in this one is, instead of using the um, default colors, what we are doing is I am using the colors based on a field value, which is based. I'm using the color based on a field value called color. So let's see how I managed to get those colors. To get the colors, what I've used a website called I Want Hue. I Want Hue is my go-to site whenever I'm working with colors, and especially when I want a lot of colors. So for this one, what I've done is I went for Indigo Night, and then I've known, like, when I go to my data set, when I look at my drinks, I know I have 53 distinct values. So I went here, I've chosen 53 in my palette, and I've chosen hardcore Victor, and then I made a palette. So this gives me a palette, and I could sort it by the lightness of the colors as well, so that I know exactly how the colors are looking like. After that, I basically just copied all these colors and I pasted it into my data, and that's how I managed to get. I just assigned a color to each and every single drink. Once I assigned those drinks that colors, I went to advanced controls and I've chose that column to get the color. So that way, whenever I am navigating between these different types of drinks, I made sure, like, I could always be able to read my foreground font color on the background color. And also, I wanted to make sure that matches with the other finishing touches I have on the report. For example, so if the background around this, the border around this image and the shadow is same as the background color of this left slicer panel. Those are little things, but that's something that, like, I make sure I'm following the little final touches. One last thing that I did on this one is I've used a tooltip, and in the tooltip I created a tooltip in a way that it looks like in stacks layout. So like any other page, you could always go and change the page size of your report. So I've chosen 150 by 200, so that way I have like a picture kind of in stack layout. So when the user hover over it, it gives a good picture, name, and what type of drink I was using. Only visual which is probably worth talking about are the image visuals that I'm using. I'm using image grid as a custom visual. The reason for that is this effects I get on these visuals. So what I mean is when I go here, and let me close this. So when I'm switching between different type of drinks, it gives me nice hover over effect, like like nice popping effect. So just to manage to get that effect, I kind of liked using this visual. Also this is probably one of my go-to visual whenever working with images, especially when I need my images to be nicely showed as a grid. This comes really handy. So for this particular visual, you could go to visual. When you go to visual settings, you could choose to show as a grid. So this way it's always quite nice, like it's always nicely aligned. Even when we're hovering over on the tooltips, you get your visual nicely in the center quite nicely. So maybe just to showcase the visuals better, I've used that visual. That's pretty much it is. That's how I designed this Power BI model. Few things I would like to iterate. Whenever you are using functionalities like I'm using here, like using tree map use as a slicer instead of using a traditional regular slicer. So whenever you're doing something different, then I would totally recommend to use hints or some labels, hint your user about their actions, so that way the report gets less confusing for the user. That's it. Hope you learned something out of it. Please let me know what you think. I will post Power BI model on my blog, and yeah, see you soon. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Bye. Hey guys, this is Pratika. So that's pretty much it is. I'm using a tree map as a slicer, which is quite